People ask me sometimes what it felt like walking out of the Vithara Hall that afternoon. They expect something dramatic. A slammed door, a final speech, a moment I carry like a scar. I tell them the truth. I felt nothing in particular. I had already done everything I needed to do before I stood up from that table. I should explain how I got there. My name is Calloway, Ren Calloway. I served 22 years as a trade representative for the Terran Compact, a title that sounds more impressive than it was. In practice, I spent those years as the person the Joint Treaty Commission could safely ignore. I attended sessions in Chamber 12 of the Vethera Hall, a room that seated 311 delegates from 47 recognized species, and I was seated, by standing protocol, in the back left tier, behind the Sulan observers and beside a defunct translation relay that nobody had repaired in 6 years. I was not on the floor. I was not in the gallery. I was in what the Commission's own seating registry listed as the Provisional Observer Row, a designation that meant, in the Commission's elaborate procedural language, that our status had not yet been formally ratified. 22 years, and we were still provisional. I want to be honest about what that means practically. In 22 years, I submitted 400 formal requests to move the Terran Compact's status from Provisional Observer to Seated Delegate. 412 requests. I have the logs. Each one was processed, assigned a docket number, routed through the Commission Secretariat, and tabled, delayed for further review, pending a quorum determination, referred to a subcommittee that met quarterly and had not produced a formal recommendation in 11 years. The Commission was not hostile to us. Exactly, hostility would have required effort. We were simply not worth the floor time. We were a minor species from a remote sector, represented by a woman in a seat that was not technically a seat, filing paperwork into a machine that had been designed to absorb paperwork forever. 22 years, that was my job. I filed, I waited, I attended sessions. I watched the Commission allocate transit rights, settle border arbitrations, ratify extraction treaties, and extend recognition to 7 new species, none of whom had waited anywhere close to 22 years. What I was doing during those 22 years, in the time that was left over, was something else entirely. I want to be careful here. I am not a person who believes in dramatic gestures. I do not believe in leverage as theater. What I did was quiet, incremental, and patient, and it was built entirely out of the things the Commission had decided were too small to bother with. The 11 species seated in the Commission's lowest recognition tier, full members in name, but rarely consulted, never give floor priority, perpetually assigned to the procedural margins. Those species had one thing in common beyond their institutional neglect. They were all, with exception, significant trading partners of the Terran Compact. Not because I had planned it that way at the outset, because they were the only ones willing to talk to us. You build relationships with the people who will return your messages. Over 22 years, I formalized those relationships. Quietly, outside the Commission's formal structure, using instruments the Commission's charter explicitly permitted, but almost nobody used. Bilateral compact agreements, which required no Commission ratification and carried full legal weight under interstellar commerce law. I drafted them carefully. I had them reviewed by 3 independent legal bodies. I had each one ratified through the domestic legislative processes of both parties. I kept no press. I attended no ceremonies. I filed each completed compact in the Commission's own public archive, under its correct docket classification, where it sat unread alongside 412 unanswered requests. By the time the Commission finally got around to us, I had completed 47 of them. The session that matters began on a Tuesday by the Terran calendar. The Commission chair, a senior Veth delegate named Sorvan Kale, called the morning's first item of business a motion to formally reclassify the Terran Compact's observer status as lapsed, owing to what the motion described as a failure to meet the ongoing participation requirements of provisional membership. It was not a hostile motion, technically. It was a housekeeping measure. We had not, in the Commission's view, done enough to justify continued provisional status. The motion would remove us from the registry entirely. There was no debate. There was no formal notification to my delegation. There was no consultation. Sorvan Kale opened the motion, scanned the room for objections, and found none, because there were none. Nobody in that chamber had strong feelings about the Terran Compact either way. That was the whole point. He began the vote. I stood up. I did not speak. I picked up the folder I had brought with me that morning, and I walked down from the Provisional Observer row to the Commission floor, which I was not technically permitted to access, but nobody moved to stop me, and I placed the folder on the main record table in front of the Commission Secretariat clerk. Then I walked to the exit and left. The folder contained a single document, a certified summary of the 47 bilateral compact agreements I had completed over 22 years, along with their full legal text, their ratification records, and a structural overview of what they collectively constituted. What they constituted, under interstellar commerce law as the Commission itself had written it, was a recognized trade federation, 48 signatories, 47 species plus the Terran Compact, representing a combined economic volume that placed it among the 7 largest trading blocs currently operating within the Commission's jurisdiction. The Commission's own charter specified that recognized trade federations of that size were entitled to a permanent seated delegation, floor access, and full voting rights on any matter touching their member species' interests. It also specified, and this was the part I had spent 3 years confirming with those independent legal bodies, that the Vithara Hall itself, the building in which the Joint Treaty Commission held its sessions, sat inside a transit corridor that had been reclassified under one of the 47 bilateral compacts as jointly administered space, not human-controlled, jointly administered. The Terran Compact was legally co-administrator of the ground on which the Commission met. I am told the vote on the lapse status motion was never completed. I am told that Sorvan Kale asked his secretariat clerk what was in the folder, and that the clerk read the summary document in silence, and that by the time she finished, several delegations were already sending urgent messages to their home governments. I am told that someone requested a recess, and that the recess lasted 4 hours, and that when the session resumed, the first item of business was a motion to formally recognize the Terran Federated Compact as a full-seated delegation with immediate floor rights, which passed without objection. I was not in the building when that vote happened. I was at the transit terminal 2 kilometers away, eating a meal that cost me 4 Terran marks and tasted of nothing in particular, watching the light change over the city. My assistant found me there an hour later. He was 24 years old, and he had been with me for 8 months, and he was still in the phase of this work where he believed urgency was a virtue. He came in at something close to a run and told me what had happened in the chamber, and I nodded, and I finished my meal. He asked me how I knew it would work. I told him I had filed every document in the Commission's own public archive. I told him that everything I had done was visible, recorded, and legal from the first day I started doing it, and that the Commission had simply never looked. He asked me if I had been angry all those years. The 22 years of the Provisional Observer row, the 412 requests, the defunct translation relay that nobody repaired. Thought about that for a moment. It was a fair question, and it deserved a fair answer. The anger, if there was any, had been useful early on, kept me precise. It had kept me from getting sloppy or impatient or loud. After a while it became something quieter, not peace exactly, but a kind of economy. The Commission's indifference was a resource, the same as any other. You could waste it by demanding to be noticed, or you could spend it by working in the space it left open. The Commission had given me 22 years of that space, and I had used all of it. I had spent it. That evening, I drafted my formal notification to the Commission, confirming my delegation's intention to take up our seated floor rights at the next scheduled session. The notification was 3 sentences long. I filed it under the same docket number I had been using for 22 years.